This year, Husqvarna launched their new Svartpilen 801, and it's a brilliant motorcycle with super cool looks that I can say firsthand is a lot of fun to ride. But thing is, it's heavily based upon the KTM 790 Duke, with Husqvarna and KTM of course being sister companies and therefore sharing a lot of their design, technology and components. So is the shiny new Husqvarna the right bike to go for, or does the original 790 still make the most sense? Well, in this video, we'll go through all of the details with 3 reasons to buy the 801 and 3 to buy the Duke. Now, the number one reason in my books to buy the Svartpilen is because of the styling, which I think is going to be a lot more broadly palatable than the typical KTM aesthetics that you'll find on the 790 Duke. This one is very angular and pointy and orange, just as you'd expect if you've seen any other bike in the KTM lineup, and while it does have a certain sportiness, and I know that it appeals to some people, I will say if you like something a little subtle, or maybe with some more traditional timeless shapes, then it's probably going to rub you up the wrong way. Husqvarna have a great history though of creating good-looking bikes off these KTM technical platforms, with the Vitpilen and Svartpilen 401 and 701 being based upon the 390 and 690s respectively. The aesthetics of this lineup has always been one of its best selling points, with cleaner lines, more subtle matte finishes, and some more unusual original design features that really do help them stand out from the crowd. After the release of those bikes, they also applied a similar approach to the KTM Adventure lineup in building the Norden 901, a bike which I think it's fair to say is another visual success. And for me, this 801 version of the Svartpilen is no different. It's a great looking bike that balances traditional shapes like the round headlight and mirrors with clean, modern lines to the bodywork and simple finishes without much in the way of graphics. I reckon all of this combines for something that a lot of people would love to open the garage to. The differences though to the two bikes go beyond the superficial, and whilst a lot of the chassis is very similar with the own-branded 4-piston radial brakes, WP suspension front and rear, 17-inch cast aluminium wheels and the same swing arm, there is a difference to the geometry specifically at the head angle, with a more relaxed setup that biases this bike a little towards stability rather than the quick turning of the Duke. Now that's not to say it's a slouch. The Svartpilen does still feel like a relatively sporty bike with a firm ride, plenty of power in the brakes, and a pretty light curb weight of 191 kilograms. But it is just that little bit more easygoing and friendly to ride than the 790, and I think for a lot of people, that'll make for a brilliant bike that you'll want to use day in, day out. This, for me, is one of those bikes that just feels super versatile, and you'd be just as happy commuting on it on some A roads and then through town, but then equally taking it out of town on some good country back roads for a bit of fun at the weekend. So look, while I know there are some people who will prefer that slightly more direct feeling that you get on the KTM, I think for a lot of others, this slightly more laid-back ride will definitely be a big selling point. Now, the other key change has to be the ergonomics, which I reckon feel most different when it comes to the handlebars. You see, the Svartpilen line of bikes has always been somewhat inspired by the scrambler style of motorcycle, and one of the most common signature features of this genre would be the high and wide handlebars that give you plenty of leverage and a nice sat-up riding position. A word of warning though, this is absolutely not a bike that should be taken off-road. While it does have some of those styling cues like the flat-track-inspired Pirelli MT60 RS tyres, the handlebar brace, some of the finishing parts to give it a bit of that rugged look, really, with the 17-inch wheels front and rear, the relatively low-slung suspension, and perhaps most importantly, zero protection underneath, this bike is realistically entirely built for the road, and it would be a heck of a shame to really mess it up off tarmac. With all that in mind though, what I will say in favour of adopting some of the scrambler style is that it does mean this bike feels exceptionally comfortable. In the same way that relaxing the handling a bit has made it feel quite versatile, high and wide bars give you this very open back angle that means it's a bike I'd be super happy with riding in traffic where you want to be sat up and looking ahead, but then you can also still tuck down and get into a more sporty position for those occasional spirited blasts. balance. On top of that, if you've tried the 790 and found it a little bit cramped, maybe you're a little bit on the taller side, then again, a more spacious, sat-up ergonomic is probably going to be more appealing to you, and so definitely give this one a demo. Now, I guess the flip side of all this in regards to both the handling and ergonomics is that if you do like to ride fast, then perhaps the 790 Duke is going to be a little more appealing and also more engaging. The lower, flatter handlebars are naturally going to get you into a more sporting riding position without you even having to think about tucking down. And of course, the steering head angle is going to give you that quick turning sensation and a fun, flickable nature. The other big factor here as well would be the tyres, and although they're a consumable and will get replaced at some point, out of the box, I'd prefer to have the more sporty, sticky rubber that you'll get on the KTM 790. Now, that's not to say that there's anything particularly wrong with the Pirelli MT60s that come on the 801, but naturally, with that sort of flat track-inspired tread pattern, there's going to be a bit less rubber on the road. In the dry, I don't think you'll notice a heck of a lot of difference unless you're really pushing it, but it's on the wet in my experience from riding similar tyres or on loose or dirty tarmac that this sort of semi-blocky tread just doesn't stick quite so well. The 790 Duke, on the other hand, ships with Maxxis Supermax tyres, and while they're not necessarily the first tyre to spring to mind when it comes to sporty riding, in my experience they did the job pretty well and are always going to feel a bit more reassuring than a tyre with a lesser land-to-sea ratio. Now onto the engine, and while they're physically pretty much the same with a 799cc parallel twin in each, there are some key differences to be aware of. The most noticeable difference on the spec sheet would be the peak power figure, with the 801 getting 10 more horses to make 105 horsepower peak. But out on the road, I wouldn't say they're all that different, and the peak torque figure remains the same at 87 Nm for both. So there's a nice strong mid-range in each of these bikes that gives you plenty to work with between corners. Now, the reason the 790 is down on horses in some markets like the UK is purely down to A2 license compatibility, with 95 horsepower being the maximum allowed before the bike can be fitted with a restrictor, down to 48 horsepower for riders in that group. And so effectively, that means KTM can sell it to a wider group of customers, but really, in the mid-range where it counts, it's every bit as strong as the Svartpilen. And in fact, I should point out that it also comes in a little bit lighter at 188 kilograms to the 191, and so in some scenarios that could also help with a little more zip. So look, if you're on an A2 license and want a slice of the KTM or Husqvarna Action, then it goes without saying that at least in the UK, the 790 is your only option between the two. But look, I think the big determining factor for a lot of riders when choosing between the two would be the price, which really is quite a difference. The KTM comes in at £7,999, but you'll pay another $2.5 grand for the pleasure of owning the 801 at $10,499. That's a lot of money for what's fundamentally a very similar bike, and while there are a few extra bits of electronics and some changes in geometry and spec here and there, you can't help but feel that you're mainly paying for the looks. Then the problem here is that it pushes the Svartpilen into a price bracket that includes a lot of other very good options, like the Yamaha MT-09, which actually undercuts it by a few £100. And so look, you really do have to want the Svartpilen and really like the looks, I think, to justify the expense. I will say though, it's a fantastic bike and it's a lot of fun out on the road, but clearly if you're on a budget and you just want a quick, fun naked bike and you don't mind something on the more garish end of the design scale, then the KTM absolutely offers excellent value in that regard. As always though, I'd love to know which bike you'd pick, so do let me know down in the comments below, and I'll also leave my full 801 review on the screen now, so you can give it a watch if you haven't already and get even more detail on this brilliant bike. Hit subscribe as well if you've not already to see more of the latest motorcycle head-to-heads like this right here on YouTube. Many thanks for watching today, and we'll catch you in the next video.